and welcome to another edition of the Mediatwits. I'm Mark Glaser, Executive Editor of PBS MediaShift. This week we'll be talking about drones, especially with Google recently buying Titan Aerospace, a drone maker that puts them up into orbit, possibly leading to better internet connectivity in remote areas. Similarly, Facebook recently bought Ascent, also a drone maker. What are the big technology companies going to do with drones? And also, what's an update on drone use in journalism? We've talked about that on previous shows. We'll discuss FAA regulations and how they are tamping down the excitement around drones. But first, let's introduce our esteemed panel. We have Andrew Lih joining us from American University. We have Fanny Cohen, our Mediatwits podcast producer in New York. We have Matt Waite joining us from University of Nebraska, who founded the Drone Journalism Lab way back in 2011. And we have Matthew Dickinson joining us from University of Missouri and their drone journalism program there as well. First of all, Matt, I'm curious what your take is on what's going on with Google buying Titan Aerospace. They say this is part of their Project Loon, which was going to put up, and I guess they've already tested, putting up balloons into space to beam in internet access. What do you think the role of drones might be for Google and for Facebook in trying to extend internet connectivity and access to other parts of the world?
Well, I think it's all part of the financial equation with drones, in that when you take a human being out of the loop in terms of flying it and controlling it, what you change is how long something can stay aloft, how often it can fly. I mean, the Titan Aerospace purchase is really interesting in that those are solar panels all over the side of the thing, so it can stay aloft for months at a time and really not have much of an issue. So it's a step toward kind of eliminating the terrestrial bonds of a lot of things, and internet access is one of them. If you think about a lot of the ways that we access the internet, it's still kind of bound in this world that is born of wireline telephone. There is wires in the ground, there's infrastructure, there's all manner of equipment and costs that are involved, and that's why you don't get internet access out in the wild spaces, because it's just way too expensive to run a wire out there. Well, places like Africa have learned that you can wire up a country with at least nominal internet access using mobile technology a lot better and a lot quicker than you can with wireline telephone or any kind of wire in the ground. So this is just another leap beyond that, terrestrial bond that allows for this kind of stuff. And if you're Facebook and you're Google and your entire business model is predicated around more people using your service, meaning more people connected to the internet, it makes sense.
And Matthew, you work on kind of the IT and tech side of drones. I don't know your knowledge around these kind of solar-powered drones, but what are some of the technical issues? Obviously, these drones aren't going to be up. I mean, they haven't even really flown them. The Titan hasn't, and Ascent, I think, is just, they're both really just in development. What are some of the technical issues to actually make this happen?
We've seen over the last few years full-size aircraft actually making, across the U.S. almost to the point of thinking going around the world with human pilots that are solar-powered. So the traditional, my drone only flies for 20 minutes at a time, a limit of battery life. If we can get them more efficient, lighter, and without the human, without the extraneous controlling stuff on it that we see with the RC style of drone, then conceptually, as Matt Waite said, we can be up for months at a time. As we've had with fun weather, if we're above the clouds, there's normally sunshine, but with clouds, we'll end up having not sunshine for parts of the day, or if you have long periods of night, you might run into issues of, hey, I've got no sun to charge my batteries. But beyond staying up, there's the issue of, if you have thousands of these things flying around, are they going to bump into each other? Are we going to hit, birds? Are we going to hit full-size aircraft and, knock jumbo jets out of the sky? So at what point can we integrate these? How do we integrate these? And again, that probably leads into an FAA discussion. But conceptually, what are we actually going to do if we have thousands of these things flying around? If we then want to develop flying cars in the next few years and transport ourselves, where are we going to get into? It's kind of an exciting world. And looking at what Google are doing with some of their imaging technology, their kind of 3D scanning phones, begs the question of what else? What other sensor packages are they going to start putting on these things to actually do mapping to do what?
And Google Earth too. Andrew, what do you think about Google's move? Because there's not a lot of trust around Google, and when you think about drones, you think about surveillance, and you think about what kinds of things. I mean, just what Google got into trouble with Google Street View and how much privacy they invaded. The thought of having Google drones kind of circling the planet sounds a little bit scary to some people.
Yeah, I think the general trend of bringing a Silicon Valley sensibility or Silicon Valley innovation attitude towards transport, towards the airspace, towards space itself is really fascinating. And these are folks who basically made their living in the traditional .com space of not following the rules or not being bound by traditional ways of looking at things. And it's really great to see this innovation happening in the skies, whether it is for aerial photography or whether it's to provide Wi-Fi or wireless access to remote places. I think it's great because for too long we've had traditional telcos and burying cables in the ground being the only ways we've been thinking about access. And it is great to see companies like Google and other folks saying, hey, no, we're going to push the boundaries on this. It's not just flying lightweight solar-powered aircraft just to show you can circumnavigate the world without refueling. There's actual interesting ways to use those aircraft in the sky when they can linger for not just hours or days, but for weeks and months at a time. So I'm really interested in what they can do with it. And we were somewhat helped by the fact that Google has cared about whether they're evil or not, or whether perception among the general public is important to them. So I'd rather have Google experimenting in this space than for certain other companies to be doing these things without that same ethical, bumper guard in that area. But it will be interesting. Google's been pushing the boundaries on fiber. I think they just recently announced that they're trying to extend Google Fiber to corporations and not just individuals. So they're pushing it on all fronts, and I think that having Google at least lead the way will get a lot more players into the field. But as Matthew said, how many of these folks can we sustain experimenting at the same time in the sky? Fortunately, I think the statistical analysis shows that we can get quite a number of these vehicles in the sky before you worry about bumping. But in terms of population-dense areas or places where there's a lot of interest, you probably will have that problem of too much density in one place, and that's where you get regulation into this whole thing. And Matt and Matthew both know what that's about because they were the ones, I think, who got the first letters about this thing from the FAA.
Yeah, Matt, do you want to kind of run down exactly what the situation is? I mean, you've been at this for a while. It seemed like you could, I guess, fly under the radar, so to speak, but now the FAA seems to really, they're doing some really kind of, it seems a bit random the way that they're enforcing the rules.
Yeah, and just to kind of dovetail for what we were just talking about with tech companies, I think one thing that bothers me a little bit about some of these tech companies talking about using drones like Amazon to deliver packages is I think they're being a little bit too cavalier about the regulatory hurdles that are in the way, and I think they're really underestimating the FAA's want to go very, very slowly with this. The FAA has said that autonomous operations, the likes that the Titan Aerospace drones would have to have in order to maintain, months of flight time and staying aloft to do the kind of work that they would do to make it economically feasible. The FAA has said that's years down the road, and they're in no hurry to be doing that. So the situation right now in the U.S. is fairly unique in the world in that the FAA has said that if you're a hobbyist and you're doing this for fun and you're not doing it for pay, you can go ahead and fly around so long as you follow some pretty basic rules, which are you stay under 400 feet, you stay out, the craft is in your line of sight at all times, you stay away from people, you don't fly over houses or neighborhoods or crowds or anything like that, and you only do it during the day. But the other group of people that can do this are the government. And they define the government as basically anything attached to a legitimate government. So anything from the local dog catcher to the military can fly in U.S. airspace, but they have to ask for specific permission from the FAA at a specific place, with a specific mission in mind and a specific craft in mind. And any deviation from that, you have to go back and get another permit. They can take up to 60 business days or more to get these permits. So from a journalism standpoint, that's pretty anathema to journalism. I mean, not to say that there aren't stories to be done out in a specific piece of property that 60 business days down the road, there's going to be a story there. Of course there is. But if you're looking to do breaking news coverage of any variety, the FAA is the last place you want to be dealing with, because it's going to take forever and a day to get permission from them. Now, that whole idea that the FAA has regulatory control over these devices, that they can say that hobbyists are okay, but commercial uses are not, is actually under pretty serious pressure right now, because the FAA fined a pilot who was flying over the University of Virginia campus, and his lawyer contested the fine, and a judge agreed with him and said basically the FAA has no definition that says what's a drone and what's a remotely controlled aircraft. They have no real good definition of what an aircraft is. In fact, the judge criticized their definition of aircraft as being overly broad and including basically anything that flies under, no matter what the power source is. So balsa wood gliders, the ones that I've seen people joke about are like passes from NFL quarterbacks. Suddenly, Peyton Manning is an FAA regulated aircraft. My favorite, actually, that I think is a really, really good one to really get the brain going, is bullets. Bullets are now an FAA-regulated aircraft, and if you think the First Amendment crowd or the Second Amendment crowd is really going to enjoy that one, you're wrong. So the FAA's whole policy of we control all airspace and we control all aircraft, and we say this is illegal, even though we don't have actual regulation on the book to control this, is under a lot of pressure, but right now it's the status quo. The FAA appealed that decision that pretty much threw that all out, kind of returned us to the status quo. They have since gone and shut down the Washington Nationals baseball team, which was flying a little DJI Phantom over their spring training practice, so over their private property and over their employees. They are investigating two citizen journalists in New York who flew devices over news events. One of them, the East Harlan building collapse. Another one was a fire at a recycling plant. They've shut down some other folks. They've shut down a beer delivery service out on a frozen lake in Minnesota. They shut down a flower delivery service right around Valentine's Day, which actually
their timing is horrible.
I'm more upset about that one than I am about myself getting shut down, because I kind of need instantaneous delivery of flowers at all times. But that's because I screw up a lot, if you haven't figured that out. But yeah, we're kind of in this weird place where nobody's happy. The justification seems to be pretty dubious. Not a lot of people are willing to take on a federal agency, and yet Congress is telling the FAA they have to come up with rules to integrate these into the national airspace. And it's all going very, very slowly. And the one last quick thing is that lack of speed on this has real consequences, because the technology is getting so available and so easy to use, and the obvious benefits are becoming obvious to pretty much anybody who has one of these things. And the FAA is rapidly going to find itself in a position where it can't regulate these things, because people are just going to ignore them, because there's just too much. There's too much to be done. There's too obvious of uses for this, and just their lack of public effort on this seems to be really turning a lot of people off.
No doubt. That's a great overview of just the legal situation and the FAA regulations, which are not too pretty. It looks like we're
By the
joined
way,
by.
it only starts at the FAA. The states are starting to get involved, and those are really some pretty First Amendment hostile regular rules that are coming around out there.
Yeah. Well, I want to. It looks like Chris Anderson's able to join us too, and he's former editor-in-chief at Wired Magazine and now CEO at 3D Robotics, and also started it with DIY drones and building his own drones with his family. Chris, tell us a little about your background with drones. What got you interested in your own take on these regulations, the FAA regulations, and what they mean?
So my background is that I started basically as a project with my children gone horribly wrong. 2006, 2007, I'm trying to get them interested in technology. We get this Lego Mindstorms robotics kit. They're bored by that. We get a radio control airplane. They're bored by that. And I thought, well, the two together and got like the robot to fly the plane. That would be a cooler robot and a better flying plane. And we just did it on the dining room table with the kids, and it kind of worked well enough that I was kind of blown away. How is it possible that a dad and his children with a toy can build a drone on the dining room table? They lost interest instantaneously. I went down the rabbit hole, started DIY Drones as a community site to figure it out. In 2009, we started spinning out some, just created a little kind of hobby company to make some boards, and that took off. And now we're a big company. We're about 200 people. We have, I'm speaking to you from our Berkeley business offices, but we have big engineering offices in San Diego, Tijuana Drone Factory, which is a great name for a band, by the way. And an Austin marketing team, and we're just opening up a second factory in Shenzhen, China. And so we make things. I think our big competitors, DJI, and we make things like this, which is our own called the Iris, and it's our own consumer drone. And the difference being only that we're an open innovation platform, so it's open source software, open source hardware, and so we kind of the Android to DJI's iOS or Apple, and we're also I don't know what we actually define drones, but we define drone as capable of full autonomy. So these things are fully autonomous. They take off, they land by themselves, they do waypoint missions, they follow things. You control them with a phone or a tablet, as well as, if you want, a radio control transmitter. But we're trying to get away from the kind of piloting RC experience, which has characterized drones to date, and make it really just, get the selfie, the ultimate selfie, get that picture. Think about what the camera sees rather than how the vehicle flies.
And what do you think about this kind of tangle of regulations that have happened? Hobbyists obviously aren't going to pay attention to a lot of the regulations and just continue on with what they're doing. But what do you think? What do you think about what's going on? What might be sensible down the road?
Yeah, so we're on the supply side of the equation. So the manufacture of these things is not use of these things that is regulated. Most of our users are hobbyists, and they fall under, I think this came up before, the recreational exemption. So if you're just using it for your own purposes, without no money changes hands, under 400 feet, visual line of sight, all that stuff you've already talked about, then you're largely fine. And all the volume in the industry right now is on the consumer recreational side, and that's where we focus right now. Also, the burden is borne by the user, not the sellers. And we don't tell people, we don't ask people what they're using it for, and we don't tell them. Obviously, we tell them, we educate them on the guidelines and responsible use, but we don't monitor it, and we don't stop them from doing anything that would get them in trouble. We do our best, and both on the community and the company side, we do our best to point fingers at bad, irresponsible use, remind people, update them. Matt's been terrific at keeping us all updated on what the regs are. And we take our kind of community education responsibilities really seriously. But at the end of the day, you're selling a product to people. There's a terms of service, there's guidelines, etc. But you can't stop them from doing stupid stuff, even if you can shame them, which we as a community on DIY Drones try hard to do. In terms of where things are going, you're focused on the United States, which has one freaky weird regulatory thing, which is the distinction between commercial and recreational use. Only the United States, as far as I know, has this weird distinction. It makes no sense to any. It's kind of a legacy of who's easier to regulate, companies or individuals. You know, if you had a choice, who would you want flying drones in the national airspace? Trained professionals or my children? You would probably go for the trained professionals, and yet they're not allowed to do it, and my children are. So a lot of the kind of weird stuff we're talking about right now is kind of a uniquely American problem. Most of our sales are actually outside of America. I have a confidence, perhaps ill-founded, that wise minds will win on this, and we will actually get away from this crazy commercial consumer distinction. But we're just going to sell drones and try to help people to be responsible at how to use it and let the regulators do their job.
Fair enough. I'm curious what, like Matthew, and you're working in Missouri, to kind of push drone journalism. What would you say to Chris, who's kind of building, and his community is building a lot of these drones? Is there something that you think could help as far as gathering news, or some kind of feature or something that you're looking for, you think journalists or people in the journalism profession might want?
We started exploring the drone journalism project here in Missouri, really saying, with a $1,000 budget, could a journalist go out and persuade their editor to let them buy a drone and use that to assist in gathering, the footage or video or photos for a story? So, the initial focus was, what video footage can we use? With the 60 to 90 business day kind of wait, it really is, how do we think about the story, this time next year that we can actually go fly for? I'm working in the technology side of things, so as well as the journalism side of things. I'm teaching a course in the fall with the technology side of things, and the students are exploring: can we put small lidar units on this for agricultural uses? Can we do indoor localization? How do we what applications? Thinking how over the last 5 years there's literally a smartphone app for that, to coin a phrase. What drone app? What applications of unmanned aero systems, unmanned aero vehicles can we dream up? And back to Chris's point, the kids really are the ones driving this with their imagination. A lot of the folks actually making the laws are stuck in their ways. And having talked with some of the Missouri's House and the Senate, the politicians actually making the laws, they're very difficult to convince there's a legitimate use for some of this stuff. So it's that public exposure for the good reasons. Some journalists are helping, some of the more I've lost the word. Some of the more people actually trying to go and get the paparazzi type footage aren't really helping the cause. But we've got a lot of applications that are promoting. Chris is the direction we're taking with the hobbyists, but it's all leading to the right end, I think, ultimately.
Paparazzi. I mean, the idea of paparazzi swarming someone with drones, it's scary, but probably in our future, right?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, I think it takes all sorts of the spectrum to actually formulate, public opinion for law for this stuff to develop over time. And the U.S. is in kind of a bizarre situation with the FAA at the moment. The public-private usage, or the public, the private, and the commercial usage, as we're stuck in as a public organization. Compared to some of the other countries where I'm sure Chris is marketing to, it's really wide open. And doing video footage of downhill skiing at the Winter Olympics. I mean, that. If the U.S. were to host the Olympics at this point in time, what would the coverage be like?
Yeah, it's true. Matt, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing at your drone journalism lab, especially recently. It sounds like you had someone in Africa doing some footage, and what else have you guys done there?
Well, it got awfully limited about last July when we got a letter from the FAA saying, knock it off. We've slowly been working our way toward getting a certificate of authorization. That's gone slower than I expected, mostly because of my fault and my schedule. But I had a student who was actually going to India to film a documentary with his dad on a Fulbright grant, and we had a couple of sorry, Chris, they're DJI Phantoms. I gave him one of them and said, "Here, go shoot a documentary with it." And he did a lot of that. And he did some other things. Got to cover an under-20 soccer tournament in Baroda, India, and got some pretty amazing footage of the game that was going on. What actually really surprised me was how open they were to letting him do this. So there's some video of him like hovering maybe 5 feet, 10 feet above head height during a penalty shootout at the end of a match. I believe it was the championship match where the players were just fine with him sitting right there, really, really fairly close to the action, and getting video of the match as the penalty shootout went on. He was there for one day. He left and had to go shoot some stuff for the documentary, and missed a day of the competition, and came back. And people in the crowd walked up to him like, "Where were you?" Like, he became part of the show after a while. They were just fascinated with this thing. He then went from India to Nairobi. There's a group there called the African Skycam Project, and they are trying to get drone journalism off the ground in Africa, and we've been kind of informally helping them. But I was able to get Ben Kramer as the student. Ben got over there and they put him up for about a month, and they collaborated on some stuff. And one of the more significant things they did there was they looked at animal conservation in Africa and some of the pressures that are on some of the more endangered species like rhinos, and rhino horn is one of the most valuable substances in the world right now. And so there's video of him flying, head height to a giraffe and over a herd of elephants. And I'm
guessing the regulations there are not the same as here.
No. I mean, there's kind of three kinds of countries in the world. There's the U.S., which stands alone in this kind of weird position we're in. There's countries like Canada, the UK, Australia, Japan, parts of Scandinavia, where it's permitted but limited. You can get permission from their civil aviation authority. You can actually get a license to do it commercially. You can apply for specific permission to fly over news events and things like that, and it's relatively common. It's just that there are certain restrictions, like you can't fly over crowds. And that's a particular one in the UK. You can't fly over people that are outside of your control. So the BBC has a drone unit in their global services unit, and they travel around the world and do this. So there's banned here in the US. There's limited in a lot of other kind of G20 nations, and then there is the rest of the world where it's just not really contemplated, and it's far more open. Now that has positive benefits and it has negative benefits. If you happen to be in a country that has a rather kind of liberal interpretation of press freedoms, you might be subject to the whims of local law enforcement. There's not a law that says you can't do it, but there's not a law that says you can, and that might put you in a tough spot particularly if you're a journalist trying to cover a story and doing things that the government may or may not like. But by and large, if you're just somebody out flying around, most of the world is far more open to you.
Chris, I'm curious about what you see. I mean, you were at Wired Magazine for a long time. What do you think some applications, let's say without these regulations, if there was, let's say, smarter regulation, what kinds of things could you envision journalists doing with drones?
Well, we're always happiest when drones are far from people. And so the kind of things that worry me a little bit is flying over, demonstrations, crowds, things like that. The kind of stuff that seems like a perfect application is natural disasters. There's a tsunami, there's an earthquake, something like that, and basically you not only have a journalistic opportunity to see what's going on, but there's also a first responder information, utility that you can bring to it. This is a way to, sort of say, here's what's actually going on the ground. Typically, there are not a lot of people around there. The concerns there would be what in the term of art is deconflicting the airspace, but making sure you don't interfere with manned aircraft and other first responders. But you don't have that same, if in fact, one of these things were to go down or a battery to die, etc., you're not going to contribute to the problem the way you might if you're flying over crowds at a sports event or a demonstration.
Yeah, and I mean, you see when something happens and there's a big news event that, there's helicopters just circling around it. So I imagine in the future we'll have, a number of drones circling around something that's happening, but hopefully in some safe, regulated way.
A guy just got arrested for a traffic. There was a traffic accident, and he was flying his drone around. And the allegation, and I don't have all the facts, but the allegation was that a medical helicopter was forced to to do another to basically delay the landing because his drone was in the way. Now that's obviously a really bad thing, and if in fact that is the case, and that's exactly what happens when A, you're trying to do it over a built-up area, over people, and B, there's no easy way to coordinate with the first responders who are trying to do their job.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's part of it is an issue of coordination, so that people who are going to be, the drones should be kind of part of the relief operation in some way, so that it's coordinated.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, there's an irony as well, which is that those those exact first responders, the public, the fire, the police, etc., are the ones who are most highly regulated. I mean, it's very hard they are the ones who have to get the COAs, the certificates of authorization from the FAA. They're the ones who have to kind of check all the boxes and dot the I's. To use these things, ideally, you would want drones to be a tool in their toolkit. And yet, it's too hard for them to do it right now, and so your average, amateur next door who's legally allowed to fly ends up putting their drone in the air, doing something that makes perfect sense to them and might have journalistic appeal, but there's no easy way for first responders to coordinate with average civilians about this stuff.
Definitely.
You're seeing other kinds of conflicts there in the whole realm of first responders. When there were those floods in Colorado last year, there was a group that was flying photography missions basically over these areas, and were providing not quite real time but very up to date aerial images of these flood areas, and were providing them to FEMA and the first responders in the area, and helping them get an idea of what was going on in these areas. And they were shut down by the FAA, told, knock it off, you're not allowed to do this. So even when people are trying to help, there's actually a company in Texas that has, they're an amateur search and rescue operation. They go help find missing people, and they got a letter from the FAA saying, stop it, you're a commercial entity, even though no money changes hands or anything like that. And they're actually pushing back. They're telling the FAA, all right, you show us how we are violating the rules, and you show us what rules we're violating. So there's a lot of conflict brewing about these regulations, and between the courts and public opinion, and even among the FAA's own constituency, that it's really putting a lot of pressure on the agency.
Andrew, any last thoughts about where this is going as far as journalism goes, and some of the uses out there, and what you think kind of there might be as a future of drones helping journalists, helping gather information?
No, I think the case that Matt mentioned is really important, because we've seen in the past that the crowd can really help in crisis response, right? So the Haiti earthquake, OpenStreetMaps didn't have a very good map of Haiti, and in fact volunteers helped by using lots of other public domain or other sources to build up those free maps, so that people doing crisis response in Haiti had free versions of very highly detailed maps. So you can imagine how drone journalism could really help this, right? That you could actually get amateurs to get drones in the air and quickly get imagery out that can help volunteers put on either OSM or other things like Ushahidi lots of data that could really help in crisis response. So to squelch this type of experimentation so early on is worrying. But as Chris said, you do have to be sensitive to the fact that there are first responders that are expecting to fly in and not have a swarm of small little flying objects in the way. So some kind of compromise needs to be made there. But trying to put a cap on innovation and the crowd being part of this is a little bit worrying.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you all joining us for the discussion. It's great, and we'll be following it for sure in the months and years to come, because we know it's something that will definitely affect kind of the media landscape and the tech landscape with Google and Facebook getting involved. I want to thank our panel, Andrew Lih from American University, Chris Anderson from 3D Robotics, Fanny Cohen, our producer, Matt Waite at the Drone Journalism Lab in Nebraska, and Matthew Dickinson from University of Missouri. We'll catch you every week on Friday on the Mediatwits. You can catch us at PBS MediaShift at mediashift.org. We'll catch you all next week. Take care.